Welcome to another edition of the Sports Lunatics. Who are the Sports Lunatics? Well, we're just two regular guys who love sports history. I'm Shawn Lavigne in Halifax, Nova Scotia,
And I'm Howie Mooney here in Barrie, Ontario.
and you are watching or listening to the Sports Lunatics show. And Howie, this week, Baltimore was the place that everybody was talking about in the baseball world, both currently with the current state of the Baltimore Orioles, who I think it was 3 years ago lost 110 games and now have won over 100 games and clinched the American League East title with such great talent. Unfortunately, the city is mourning the loss of Mr. Oreo, and that is Brooks Robinson, who we lost at the age of 86 earlier this week, battling illness. But it just brought back so many memories. Now, I never really got to see Brooks Robinson play, but I'll tell you a quick story before we get started. My grandmother used to collect yearbooks. I don't know if it was Britannia or who put the yearbooks out, but we had them from 1967 through to I think it was 1974. And as a young kid, I had a lot of time on my hands growing up on a farm in Eastern Ontario. But I was mesmerized reading these yearbooks and finding out history of what happened in the world for that particular year. Go to 1970, and the picture that it just brought back all these memories this week after I heard that Brooks Robinson had passed away, was a picture of Brooks Robinson, a still photo, but reading what he did in the 1970 World Series. To this day, it was like yesterday. I was in my grandparents' living room reading this book and seeing this picture of Brooks Robinson.
Let me guess. He was either across the page horizontally, diving for a ball, or he was up at the plate with that helmet with the little peak on the brim of his cap or of his baseball helmet.
It was, of course, a defensive play.
Yeah.
And it was that great play in the World Series 1970. You've seen it all week on YouTube and the news of making this spectacular play. But there was this still photo of it where he's reaching down to get the ball. And then, of course, if you watch the video, makes this amazing throw over and gets the runner at first base. And one of the greatest tributes I saw on Twitter or X this week was Johnny Bench, and all he put was, in 1970, I was 0 for 4 at hits to third base. That's all he put. But you knew that was an amazing tribute because Johnny Bench played for the Cincinnati Reds against that Brooks Robinson Baltimore Orioles team. So I just wanted to start the show off as we pay tribute to Brooks Robinson, the greatest defensive player in the history of baseball.
The greatest. Yeah, he is absolutely one of the top 1% of third basemen defensively that ever played the game. No question. And if you've ever played third base in a baseball game, you know how difficult it is. I was a utility player when I played. I could play short, I could play second, I could play the outfield positions, all three of them. I tried playing, I caught a game once. I just told the pitcher, you throw whatever you're going to throw. I'm going to catch it. I'm not going to tell you what to throw. I'm not going to call a game. You throw whatever you want. We got through it. But I played third base one time, and I found it to be the hardest position to play on the field. The ball comes at you so fast, and it can overtake you very easily. There's a reason that people say you have to have a chest of steel to play third. And, Brooks Robinson was just spectacular. You talked about those plays that he made in the 1970 World Series. You know that I play a baseball sim game called APBA, and each position defensively is ranked in a number of points. The catcher, you could be a 9 at the most. Pitcher, you could be a 1 or a 2. First base, it could go up to 5. Second base can go up to 9. Shortstop can go up to 10. The outfield positions go 1, 2, or 3, 3 being the best and 1 being the worst. At third, if you have a guy with a 5 at third, that's a great third baseman. Sal Bando was a 5. People like that were a 5. Brooks Robinson was a 6. And there weren't very many 6s at third base. Brooks Robinson was a number 6. You said, I think we were talking earlier, that he had 16 gold gloves at third base. 16. I mean, just to play 16 years is an accomplishment, but he had 16 gold gloves at his position. Greg Maddux had 18 as a pitcher. That's just unbelievable to me that he could have 16 gold gloves at that position. But he was amazing. And from all accounts, everybody that you read, Ken Rosenthal, Buster Olney, all those people say that he was an even better person off the field than he was a player on it. That to me says everything about Brooks Robinson.
He was a first ballot Hall of Famer, played 23 seasons in Baltimore, started as an 18-year-old in 1955. Really, it took about 5 years to really crack the lineup in Baltimore, because at that stage, Howie, as you know, the fact that anybody could play at 18, that was a bit of a anomaly, because usually you played in the minor leagues and you worked your way up in the minor leagues to make the big club. And he's an Orioles Hall of Famer, 2-time World Series champion. We just discussed 1970. We'll get more in depth about not only Brooks Robinson's performance, but when you read the lineup of that team, and of course managed by Earl Weaver, who we'll speak about, just amazing memories flood back. 1964 American League MVP, was also the 1966 All-Star Game MVP. 4-time most valuable Oriole. 1966, I just mentioned the All-Star Game. 18-time All-Star, only ended up second to Cal Ripken Jr., another Baltimore baseball legend who was elected to his 19th. But Brooks held that record until 2001. So incredible company for an incredible man. Holds all the fielding records, Howie, for third base to this day, which is incredible. Considering, and it's not even close. Putouts and assists and double plays, like it's crazy.
But it was the way that he could get to balls. It wasn't just the numbers; it was the way he could get to balls. That 1970 World Series you talked about. I was 10 years old at that time, and somehow I managed to be sick during that World Series. I don't know how. I don't know why. I remember I was sitting, at my grandmother's place or grandparents' place watching the baseball, and to see the show that he put on. You talked about Johnny Bench saying 0 for 4 on balls hit to third base. I mean, everybody was 0 for with Brooks Robinson there. The plays that he made, ranging into foul territory to get balls that were hit down the line. Diving for line drives and catching them, and the throws that he would make from distance, from that, from there to first. It was just incredible. And that Baltimore Orioles team at the time, they had that window from 69 to about 72 where they were just spectacular. The pitching staff they had, Jim Palmer, Mike Cuellar, Dave McNally, all 20-game winners in the same season. Just unbelievable. And then you look around at shortstop, they had Mark Belanger, who was just a tremendous defensive shortstop. He weighed about 110 pounds, but he was just an incredible defensive shortstop. So that left side of the infield with Robinson and Belanger, unbelievable. Boog Powell at first, who could hit the ball as far as anybody. Andy Etchebarren and Ellie Hendricks catching. At second base, you had who was it at second base? It was Davy Johnson. Davy Johnson, the future manager, great manager
extraordinaire.
Yes, and in the outfield, you had Don Buford, Paul Blair, Merv Rettenmund, all those guys.
Frank Robinson,
yes, Frank Robinson, an MVP in both leagues. That team was stacked. You had a young Bobby Grich, 19 years old, playing as a backup second baseman. They were stacked, and they were tremendous. But they won 109 games in 69. went to the World Series against the Miracle Mets and lost in 5. They had beaten Minnesota in 3, swept them. Just get out of here. Go away, Twins. We're going to the World Series. And then lost to the Mets in 70. They beat the Reds, the Red Machine. The beginning of that big Red Machine. Just a tremendous team, and I can't say enough about them. And they had the great uniforms too, eh? When you have that, their road uniforms, the gray road uniforms with the black and orange, just beautiful, and that stadium too, Memorial Stadium, was just that the views on television were unbelievable. As a 10-year-old, I was like you were looking at those books. I was watching TV and seeing Baltimore, and I was thinking like, oh, this is baseball. This is the way it's meant to be played.
And you know what else, Howie? It was all played in the afternoon.
Yes. Yeah. I was home from school and I was watching it. I was like, can I get another ginger ale, Granny?
But it's true. Like, that was the romance of baseball back then, that you got to see a World Series game in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Like, that was special. And, for people our ages, we miss that. I sort of, when I started watching baseball, it was more prime time. I was starting to get into prime time baseball at night, so you didn't get to see a lot of afternoon playoff games. There were a few, based around the NFL schedule and television, which really started to dictate the games, the start times and when they were played. It was all based around television. Whereas back, in 1970, not as much, because there wasn't as much content. There were only 3 networks at the time. The other thing that was unique about World Series games and playoff baseball is that I think it was NBC had the rights at that time. Kurt Gowdy was calling the games, but they would use the local broadcasters as part of the television coverage. Whereas now, you have your set broadcast booth of national broadcasters, but back then it was so different. That's how Al Michaels really got, not discovered, but was really put on the map. And that led to, opportunities at NBC and moving forward then, because he was able to call a World Series game at 27 in 1972. And let's not forget, Howie, in 1970, that was sort of the start of the Big Red Machine, as well, with Pete Rose and Johnny Bench. They were no slouches. And
Davey Concepcion, Tony Perez.
Absolutely. They were fantastic.
Guys. Bobby
and
Tolan
again, we still haven't mentioned Earl Weaver, who was the fiery manager of that team in 1970, and just the impact he had on baseball, and just his style, and he was an umpire's worst nightmare if they blew a call, which we miss today. Like we do.
I would love to see Earl Weaver go talk to Angel Hernandez, but that's a story.
That is a whole other topic right there. But getting back to Brooks Robinson, Howie, for the analytic crowd, he was 7th in wins above replacement at third base. But he still had 2,848 hits, 268 home runs, 1,357 RBIs. His OPS of 105, which was 111 between 1960 and 1974, really his prime years.
Yeah.
He's one of the most valuable third basemen of all time. His career WAR is 78.5.
Wow.
According to Baseball Reference, which is 7th for his position. So he could win games with his bat, and he can win games definitely with his glove.
Yes. That Baltimore team too. As a kid, seeing 2 guys named Robinson on the same team, I found that to be kind of weird or strange or interesting anyway. But you talked about that team. In that time, you had great other teams as well. I mean, the Mets were just coming up. The Reds were just starting to become that Big Red Machine, as you said. There were other great teams there as well. Detroit had a great team with Al Kaline, Denny McLean and Mickey Lolich, and you had teams, great teams peppered throughout baseball, great players peppered throughout baseball. Behind me, I've got Willie Mays uniform or jersey. I've got Rod Carew on this side, George Brett, Johnny Bench. You had some great players, and baseball at that time was still the national pastime. You talked about it going prime time. I think I'm going by memory, but I think 1972 with Oakland and Cincinnati was the first World Series that was broadcast in prime time. And as you said, they had the home announcers doing the play-by-play. But Al Michaels, you're right, for Cincinnati. But that I loved baseball at that time. The Expos came into existence in 1969, and I immediately became a baseball fan. I became an Expos fan, but I also became a fan of just everything around the game. You remember those Oakland A's with those green and yellow and different multicolored uniforms. Some people said they looked like softball uniforms, but I was 12 years old in 72. I didn't care. I loved those uniforms. But some of them got to be extreme. The Cleveland ones with the all red pants and everything. No, get rid of that. But no, baseball at that time was still just massive for me and massive in North America.
So fastball was a big, around, the Ottawa area. You played baseball. I played a lot of fastball. I had uncles who played slow pitch. And it's funny you talk about the uniforms, because that was actually one of the more exciting days when you played was, okay, what type of uniform are we getting? What's the color scheme? How are we going to look in these unis? And it's funny you brought up, we're talking about the Orioles of those days, because they were a really popular color, as were the A's.
Yeah.
They really were. You saw a lot of fastball teams, or any team, baseball, whatever, in those color schemes. Like they were super popular at that time. Not as much Yankees, actually, at least from what I saw, but I do remember a lot of teams would go with either the A's or the Orioles color schemes. For whatever reason, they just were very popular at that time.
The A's were the first team to go with that kind of multicolor look, and then everybody else followed. I mean, sports is a copycat kind of a dominion, so everybody started going to the multicolors the way that Charlie Finley did with the A's. And in a lot of ways, Charlie Finley was a genius, but I think that in some ways too, he couldn't figure out people. And that A's dynasty from 72 to 74 unraveled and dismantled pretty quickly.
Brooks Robinson was a first ballot Hall of Famer, received 92% of the vote in 1983. And at the time, Howie, only 8 players of all time up until 1983 had ever received a higher percentage. Like that's the one thing that, this week has really, I never got to see him play. I've saw the documentaries, I've seen the footage, but just the impact that he had on the game and on his position and the importance. He wasn't an athletic guy.
No.
He wasn't the greatest hitter. He wasn't fast, but he just had the smarts of the game and where to be positioned properly. And, a lot of his teammates reflected back that, before all the analytics and all this information that we have today, back then it was in his mind. Like he knew where to play every player when they were at bat. Like he had that mind and that knowledge of where to be positioned properly on the diamond for a specific hitter. And that's what made him so great.
You hear things about certain players and certain third basemen specifically. If the guy couldn't hit, he'd still win games for the team by making great plays at third. You hear that about Matt Chapman, and he had a great month of April, and since then his average and OPS have just gone into the tank, but he still wins games with his glove and with his arm. And Brooks Robinson, not only could he play the position, but he could hit too. And that's I mean, that's why he got into the Hall of Fame on the first ballot. And that's why he got in with 92%, because he was a great defensive player. He was a great, he had a great bat. And I think too, I don't underestimate this part of it. He was a great person as well. And that goes a long way with the voters, who are, a lot of whom are writers. And it's not fair for them to do it necessarily, but a lot of writers will vote with their hearts as well as with their minds. And so if a player was good to them, that will go a little bit of a way anyway to getting a vote.
So two great stories that I heard this week. One, Scott Van Pelt, the ESPN anchor, posted an Instagram story of he had an autographed Brooke Robinson ball as a kid because he lived in the Baltimore area, near Baltimore. Went to a game, got a ball. It was signed. Of course, what did a lot of kids back then do? Not thinking of the memorabilia value that most people think of today. He started playing catch with his buddy with his ball. Well, the ball rolled down a hill or somehow ended up in a sewer. He
Oh,
lost the ball.
oh,
Somehow he relayed this story on air years later. Somebody heard it, reached out to Brooks Robinson. Brooks Robinson signed a new baseball, sent it to Scott Van Pelt. You know,
unbelievable.
the other one is Rich Eisen told a hilarious story. He was at a celebrity golf tournament, and anyways, he was waiting for his ride, and they told him to get up really early and be ready, and they'll pick him up. Well, the ride never showed up, so he called down to the desk, and it's like, is there anybody, at the tournament, like waiting to pick me up or at the tournament? So I guess somebody at the desk called out into the lobby, "Hey, is anybody here from the tournament?" Rich Eisen said a voice comes on the phone and, "Hi, you were looking for somebody from the tournament?" "Yeah, waiting for my ride. My ride's late, whatever." It turned out it was Brooks Robinson. He had just heard that, oh, somebody needed help.
Oh,
Rich Eisen said within 10 minutes he was picked up.
oh,
That Brooks made a call, driver comes, picks
oh.
everybody out. Like it, but that's the type of guy he was. It was just a really great human being, and a wonderful, two wonderful stories. But there's so many more.
Oh
You
yeah.
saw the emotion. You saw the emotion this week. Howie, Jim Palmer breaking down on air. He's a Baltimore Oriole
Oh
broadcaster.
yeah.
Just celebrated 60 years with the franchise.
Well, Jim Palmer was an amazing pitcher too. He was one of the cornerstones of that pitching staff.
Absolutely. So, but he was emotional. Boog Powell, as you
Oh,
mentioned, who was the MVP in that 1970 year. He was the American League MVP, talking about his friend, and there was such a close knit group, and they all lived in the Baltimore area. That was the other thing. Like that was home. That was home base. And
that was a time too when guys retired. They stayed in those communities where they played, and they lived there. And that's, yeah, that's one of the wonderful things. I remember when we were younger, we would play. We all played this. We played organized ball hockey in leagues. And in 84, 85, and 86, we went down to South Jersey and played in the tournament there. One year we played in Philly, which is like across the bridge. Another year we played in Brick, New Jersey. But we spent some time at the home of the guy who organized the tournament in Cherry Hill. And he says, yes, so and so from the Flyers, who played he lives over there, and another guy lives over there, and they all stayed close to where they played and retired there. And I that's one of the things I love about talking about players from those eras, is that there was always a sense of community with them that I don't know, maybe doesn't seem to exist as much today because guys make so much more money. And I don't begrudge anybody the money. I don't begrudge anybody anything, but it was wonderful that those guys would stay in those communities.
well, a lot of these guys are ambassadors for the franchise,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
and that's and you see, usually it is the much older players who have, essentially lived in that community for 50 years
Yeah.
or longer.
Yeah.
And there's staples. Of course, Boop Powell has, the famous barbecue place at Oriole Park, and has become a successful entrepreneur. And
Yeah.
Jim Palmer has been with the team as a broadcaster forever, after his playing days, and all these guys, and you see that with a lot of the older franchises, uh, where it's important to them too to keep the legacy going.
Yeah.
Especially, let's be honest, Baltimore has not had the greatest success. When you think of that, and you framed it great, from 69 through to really the mid 80s,
Sure.
even the later 80s, like, they were successful. They were
Yeah.
always in contention. They
Yeah.
always had good ball clubs. And
Well, you
you
talked
know,
about it at the beginning, at the top of the show, Shawn. How great this current Orioles team is. They
right.
won 100 games this week. First time that a Baltimore Orioles team has won 100 games in decades. Uh, and to go back, it goes back to that period of time that we're talking about. That how great the Orioles were, and what a juggernaut they were for years and years and years, to the point where people are saying, "Oh, we have to deal with the Orioles again." Earl Weaver in that team. I remember when the Blue Jays came into existence in '77, and the Orioles came in and just slapped them around. Just slapped them around every time they'd come to Toronto. They would slap the Blue Jays around, and it was those damned Orioles. Why do we have to put up with these guys? But they were just so good.
Oh, you think of the players, like you mentioned a bunch on that, just on that one team alone, and I think of Eddie Murray when he came in
Yeah,
'77, I think it
yeah.
was,
Well,
you
I think
know,
of
and
that '83 team, Mike Boddicker as the pitcher for that team.
right.
And he's another guy that stuck around in Baltimore after he finished playing, and all those guys. You go back, and it's just great team after great team after great team, and the old players retired, and the new players came in, and they were still great.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they had a tradition, and they had a philosophy, and it wasn't just. I was fortunate. I had actually a cousin. I met them once. They were from Rochester, and Rochester was the farm club of the Orioles.
Yes, you're right.
Now, here's a story I'm going to tell you that I am going to really, you know, it's not going to be a good look on my part. So I told you the Scott Van Pelt story. Well, I was given or sent a bunch of swag uh, from the Rochester team, including a team autograph ball. Guess who was on that ball?
Cal Ripken.
Of course. Guess where that ball is?
Oh, not in a sewer.
Let's put it this way. It could have been in a manure pile for all I know.
Uh
I have no idea where that ball went. And I kicked myself
yeah.
years later realizing, and it's not even for the money. It's not even for the money. It's just for I had it.
It's
Like
what you
I
have in
had
your heart. It's what it meant to you in your heart.
right. Because this
Yeah.
would have been in those early 80s. So they would have had some
Yeah.
significant names on that ball
Yeah.
that
It's
that
it's it's funny that you mentioned that. I didn't know we were going to go down the AAA road, but I mean the Rochester Red Wings
sure.
were affiliated with the Baltimore Orioles for decades and decades and
Right.
decades. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like with the Yankees, they had the Columbus Clippers.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Mets had the Norfolk Tides. Teams were affiliated with one AAA team for forever and ever and ever, and then it started to change. I mean, I was listening to a Yankees game earlier last week, and they were talking about Scranton Wilkes-Barre, and to me, Scranton Wilkes-Barre was always with the Phillies.
Right.
It's not now they're with the Yankees, and it's
Yes.
like what
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
it's all thrown out of whack, and I'm an old guy now. I can't have all this change.
Well, as a kid, and I'm sure you were that way too. I read the minor league results just as much as I followed the major league results in
Yeah,
terms of, well, who's coming up next, and who's the hot prospects, and you're right. Like that's what we did. It was all there. That I would always keep track of the Expos minor league affiliates and the Blue Jays minor league affiliates and see how they're doing.
Well, one of the things I did in my broadcasting life was
Right.
I did color commentary for the Ottawa Lynx, which was the AAA affiliate for the Montreal Expos for the decade of the '90s, from the time they came in '93. And I mean, it opens your eyes to see a lot. I mean, we saw some great players come through. Chipper Jones playing with the Braves affiliate. Guys like that, Javi Lopez, or guys coming through with the Clippers, Bernie Williams, a very young Derek Jeter, guys coming in and playing, and I still have all of my international league guides that show all the lineups for all the teams, and one day we'll go through them and we'll look at all the players that I got to see play. And for you were talking about the ball signed by Cal Ripken. I had a Chipper Jones bat, a broken bat, and I moved around a lot between Ottawa and Seattle and Vancouver and then Toronto, and somehow in one of the moves we lost the bat. I feel the same way about that bat as you do about the Cal Ripken ball. I wish I still had that Chipper Jones bat. But all these little things, as we go through life and we accumulate things, and I mean, I still have a lot of wonderful things, in the rooms over there. Doing AAA baseball, as I said, it opens your eyes to the way guys think, the way guys feel, guys coming on their way up, guys on their way down and not happy about it. It's whatever happens at the big club level, that's the most important thing. Whatever happens at AAA, it's nice if they win, but what happens at the top is what matters. That's when it's a good day, when the big club wins.
Well, and like I said, bringing it back to Brooks Robinson, it took him 5 years to get established. So
yeah,
like he may have cracked the lineup at 18, but
well, guys had to pay their dues. Young
right.
guys, when they came in, sit down, shut up, and listen and look and learn. And that's how it was. And you say 5 years, he was 23. That's still pretty young in baseball years. 23 at the major league level. That's pretty good. But yeah, the guys came in, they sat down, they kept their mouths shut. They carried bags for guys if they had to. They did whatever they had to do. Rookies were hazed. I mean, there was hazing going on back then, and it was kind of brutal sometimes. But the young guys sat down, shut up, listen, look, and learn.
Well, just in your life, doing the Lynx stuff, I always think back to minor league baseball. I always think of Bull Durham. Like was that the life? Was that sort of, that was reality or pretty close to it?
Well, you look at that story and Crash Davis, for him to be able to keep playing baseball, he had to be the guy, the mentor for some of these, for this young pitcher. And that's how baseball is. And that's how baseball was. I remember when Larry Robinson was drafted by the Montreal Canadiens, he spent a couple of years in Nova Scotia, and the Canadiens picked up this old defenseman, Noel Price, to go down and play in Nova Scotia and teach Larry Robinson how to play. That was, and that was how it was. If you wanted to keep playing, this is what you're going to do. You're going to mentor this young kid that we think is going to be a star, and you're going to turn him into a star. And, that's real life. That's how sports is and was. And you see it today too.
Yeah, totally. You see it all the time, actually, that you always have, everybody talks about, you need that guy, that leader, that mentor.
Yeah.
Especially for young teams, especially in hockey, it feels like that even though it's a young man's game, the best teams always have that veteran leadership, that presence. And sometimes it takes years for teams to figure that out.
Yeah.
But to have those character guys who've been through the battles, who have faced adversity, and passing it on to the younger ones, because, we recently talked about Dan Marino, and he thought he'd get to multiple Super Bowls.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not easy. It's
No.
not easy to win in professional sports.
Nope.
And especially in baseball, where it is a grind day in and day out.
Yeah. You might
That
have a day off or 2 days off in a month.
right. And back in 1970, you know, it it
Playing double
wasn't like
headers
you
and
had first class travel. It wasn't like, you were commercial. It was
but
so
the
different.
hotels were nice. They
Yes,
had nice hotels. I mean, if you read Ball Four,
that's
it
true.
takes place in 1970, and Jim Bouton speaks candidly about life in the big leagues and life at that time. And if anybody out there hasn't read Ball Four, go to a used bookstore, find it. Read it. It's one of the greatest books that talks about the baseball life at that time. And guys made very little money. Maybe not. Some guys made 7, 8, 9,000 a year, and they had to have second jobs. And we've talked about this before on the show, Shawn. Life was different for professional athletes at that time. Yes, they were getting paid for playing, but it wasn't like they were making the millions and millions of dollars that guys make today.
They needed day jobs.
They needed day jobs. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the perfect way to end this edition of the Sports Lunatics. Howie, just want to remind everybody, check us out, the sportslunatics.com. You just wrote a really emotional piece. We're going to talk about that on the bonus show on the Sports Lunatics YouTube channel, because it was a really heartfelt article about your brother-in-law who recently passed, and it was a tearjerker, but very inspirational, and really enjoyed it. So we're going to talk about that on the bonus show. You can also listen to us on the Fired Up Network. You can check out the podcast there. And again, please give us a like. Please subscribe to the Sports Lunatics YouTube channel. I'm Shawn Lavigne in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
And I'm Howie Mooney here in Barrie, Ontario.
And you've been listening to the Sports Lunatics Show. Have a great sports day.